The snow had been falling since afternoon, thick and steady, the kind that muffled sound and made the world feel temporarily gentle. I remember thinking it felt like a good sign. Christmas Eve always did that to me. No matter how many times it disappointed, I still showed up hoping it would be different. I stood on the porch for a moment before knocking, shifting my weight from one foot to the other, my arms full of wrapped gifts. I had chosen each one carefully. Not expensive, but thoughtful. The kind of gifts that said I remembered you. The porch light flickered on, and before I could knock, the door opened. My dad barely looked at me before stepping aside. "You're late," he said flatly. "I drove 3 hours," I replied, forcing a smile. "The roads." "Excuses," he muttered, already turning away. Inside, the house looked exactly the same. Same couch, same crooked picture frame, same overly bright Christmas lights blinking like they were trying too hard to create warmth. My brother sat sprawled on the couch, phone in hand, feet up on the coffee table like he owned the place. When he saw me, he smirked. "Well, look who finally showed up," he said. "Thought you weren't coming this year?" I ignored the comment and set the gifts down near the tree. "Merry Christmas," I said. Dad grunted. My brother didn't bother responding. We sat down to dinner, and the conversation went exactly how it always did. Dad talked about my brother's job, his promotion, his plans. My brother soaked it up, adding exaggerations here and there. When I spoke, the room went quiet, like my words were background noise no one had tuned into. "So," Dad said eventually, carving the roast. "Still doing that, whatever it is you do." "It's my career," I replied quietly. My brother laughed. "Career? You mean that thing that barely pays rent?" That was the first crack. I felt it in my chest, sharp and familiar. "I'm doing fine," I said, though my voice wavered. Dad sighed heavily. "If you were doing fine, you wouldn't have ended up like this." Like this. As if I were a cautionary tale, something inside me shifted. Years of swallowing comments, of shrinking myself to keep the peace, started pushing back. I opened my mouth to respond, but Dad stood abruptly. "You know what? I'm sick of this. You come in here every year with that attitude." "What attitude?" I asked, stunned. "I haven't said anything." "That's the problem," he shouted. "You never say anything useful." Before I could react, he stormed toward the tree, grabbed the gifts I'd brought, and yanked them up in his arms. My heart skipped. "Dad, stop." He threw the front door open, cold air rushing in, and flung the gifts outside into the snow. Boxes tumbled, paper tore, something inside one of them cracked loudly. "Jif o wef, before I collectio pass," he yelled. The words hit harder than the cold. Behind him, my brother clapped. Actually clapped. Like this was entertainment. "About time," he said, grinning. For a moment, everything went silent. The blinking lights, the falling snow, the years of hurt pressing against my ribs. I bent down, picked up my coat from the chair, and slipped it on slowly. My hands didn't shake. My voice didn't break. "Gladly," I said, smiling. They both stared at me like they didn't recognize the person standing there. I stepped outside, the door slamming shut behind me, the snow swallowing the sound just like it always had. The cold hit me fully once I reached the end of the driveway. It wasn't just the temperature, it was the familiar loneliness that always followed moments like this. I sat in my car for a few seconds without starting the engine, watching snow gather on the windshield, letting the silence settle. Inside that house, they were probably already rewriting the story, turning me into the villain, the disappointment, the ungrateful child who couldn't take a joke. That narrative had followed me my entire life. Growing up, I learned early that love in our house was conditional. My brother figured it out too, but instead of fighting it, he leaned into it. He learned exactly what Dad wanted to hear, what made him proud, what earned applause. I learned how to stay quiet, how to not need too much, how to disappear when things got tense. When my brother succeeded, it was celebrated. When I did, it was questioned, minimized, or ignored. I was the responsible one, the one who paid their own way, the one who never asked for help because asking meant being reminded of how inconvenient I was. That pattern never changed. When Dad's business collapsed years ago, I was the only one who answered the phone. My brother was too busy, too important, too valuable. Dad sounded smaller then, scared even. He asked for help like it physically hurt him. I said yes without hesitation. I always did. I remembered sitting in a dull office, signing papers I barely understood at the time. I remembered the weight of responsibility settling onto my shoulders, heavy but familiar. I remembered telling myself it was temporary, that family helped family, that things would balance out eventually. They never did. I paid, I waited, I stayed quiet. And in return, I became invisible again. As I drove away that night, memories played in fragments, Dad taking credit for things I'd done behind the scenes, my brother mocking me for being too nice. holidays where my presence felt tolerated at best. I used to think patience was strength. I used to believe that if I endured long enough, they'd finally see me. But endurance without boundaries is just slow self-erasure. I pulled into a gas station, parked under a flickering light, and finally let myself breathe. I wasn't angry the way I used to be. That surprised me. The hurt was still there, deep and old, but layered over it was something new: clarity. They didn't throw me out because I failed them. They threw me out because they needed someone to look down on to feel powerful. I took out my phone and scrolled through old messages, ones I'd never sent, drafts of explanations, apologies I didn't owe. Then I opened the folder with scanned documents, legal ones, official ones, the ones that proved what I'd quietly done to protect myself after years of being taken for granted. I remembered the day I finally stopped waiting for them to change. The day I sat across from a lawyer and said, "I just want things to be fair." The day I chose myself without making a speech about it. That decision had felt terrifying at the time. It felt selfish, wrong even. But sitting there now alone in my car on Christmas Eve, I realized it was the first truly kind thing I had ever done for myself. The snow kept falling, soft and relentless. I started the engine. They thought the story ended when I walked out that door. They had no idea it was only beginning. Back at the house, the mood shifted the moment the door slammed behind me. The anger lingered, buzzing in the air like static, but it quickly transformed into something else: relief. At least that's how they saw it. Dad paced the living room, muttering to himself, replaying the argument out loud as if rehearsing it for an audience that would agree with him. My brother dropped back onto the couch, stretching out comfortably, the same smug ease settling back into his posture. "Told you," my brother said, grabbing a handful of chips from the bowl on the table. "Always causes drama, ruins everything." Dad nodded sharply. "Ungrateful. After everything I've done." They didn't mention the gifts lying broken in the snow. They didn't mention the years of silence, the phone calls unanswered, the way I had slowly faded from their lives except when I was convenient. To them, the problem had been removed. Christmas could continue. They turned the TV up louder. A holiday movie played, fake snow, perfect families, laughter that didn't echo with resentment. My brother joked about calling friends later, about how quiet the house felt now. Dad poured himself a drink and sank into his chair, convinced he had regained control. For the first time that night, they felt victorious. 2 hours passed, the clock ticked loudly on the wall, each second bringing them closer to something they couldn't see coming. Outside, the snow kept falling, covering footprints, burying evidence of the scene that had unfolded earlier. The world looked calm again, then came the knock. Not the casual knock of a neighbor or delivery driver. 3 firm raps. Controlled. Official. Dad frowned. "Who would be out this late?" My brother shrugged. "Maybe someone complaining about the noise." Dad opened the door, irritation already on his face, prepared to assert himself the way he always did, but the words died in his throat the moment he saw the uniforms. 2 police officers stood on the porch, their breath visible in the cold air. "Yes?" Dad asked, his voice suddenly careful. "Sir," one officer said calmly, "we're responding to a report concerning this property." Dad laughed nervously. "This must be a mistake." The officer glanced at a clipboard. "According to county records, the legal owner of this residence is not present. We're required to inform you that you're currently occupying a property without the owner's consent." The room went silent. My brother stood up. "That's not true," he said quickly. "This is our father's house." The officer shook his head. "The deed is registered under a different name." He said my name. Dad's face drained of color so fast it looked unreal. His mouth opened, then closed. No," he whispered. "That can't be right." The officers explained patiently. The paperwork, the timeline, the formal notice already filed. The reason they were here tonight, because the owner had exercised their legal right after being removed from the property earlier that evening. My brother laughed, sharp and brittle. "This is a joke. You're saying we're, what, squatters?" The word landed heavy in the room. "I'm saying," the officer replied evenly, "that you'll need to vacate. You'll be given a short window to collect essentials." Dad sank into the chair like his legs had given out. "Why would they do this?" he asked, voice cracking. The answer was simple. Because they could. Outside, across the street, I watched the flashing lights reflect off the snow, calm settling into my chest. I didn't feel joy. I didn't feel anger. I felt finished. They had spent years believing I would always leave quietly, always absorb the damage, always protect them from consequences. This time, the consequences had arrived on their doorstep, and they wore badges. I didn't go back inside right away. I stayed across the street, the cold no longer bothering me, watching the lights flash against the windows that had once felt so heavy with expectation. The house looked smaller from here, less powerful, just a structure full of memories that no longer had a grip on me. Eventually, the door opened again. Dad stepped out slowly, shoulders slumped, the authority he'd worn so comfortably stripped away in a single night. My brother followed, angry and frantic, talking too fast, pacing the porch like movement alone could undo what had already happened. That's when I crossed the street. The snow crunched beneath my boots, loud in the quiet that had settled after the officers finished explaining everything. Dad noticed me first. His eyes widened, then softened into something unfamiliar, uncertainty. "You planned this," he said, not accusing, not shouting, just stating it like a realization. "No," I replied calmly. "I prepared for this." My brother scoffed. "You think this makes you powerful?" I looked at him for a moment, really looked. The same person who had clapped while I was being thrown out, the same person who had always stood behind Dad's shadow and called it strength. "This isn't about power," I said. "It's about boundaries." Dad swallowed hard. "Why didn't you tell us?" I almost laughed. Was funny, but because it was tragic. "You never listened," I said gently. "Not once." Silence fell between us, thick, heavy, honest. "I'll give you time," I continued. "Enough to pack essentials. I'm not here to humiliate you." My brother opened his mouth to argue, but Dad raised a hand to stop him. For the first time I could remember, he didn't look at my brother for approval. He looked at me. "You could have taken everything," Dad said quietly. "I know," I replied. "But I won't take more than I already lost." That seemed to break something in him. His shoulders shook once, just slightly, before he turned away. I went inside after they left the room, not to reclaim it emotionally, just to close the chapter properly. I picked up the broken gifts from earlier, setting aside what could be saved. The tree still blinked in the corner, stubbornly cheerful, unaware of the shift that had happened beneath it. I stood there for a moment, breathing in the quiet. No shouting, no judgment, no shrinking, just space. By the time I stepped back outside, Dad and my brother were loading boxes into the car. They didn't look at me this time, and for once I didn't need them to. As they drove away, the street fell silent again. Snow erased their tire tracks almost immediately. I locked the door behind me and rested my forehead against it for a second, not in grief, but release. Revenge hadn't felt like fireworks or shouting or victory speeches. It felt like standing still while the world finally adjusted to the truth. I turned off the lights, walked upstairs, and opened a window. Cold air rushed in, clean and sharp. For the first time in my life, the house didn't feel like a battlefield. It felt like mine.